The 11 o'clock client gave my receptionist a fake name and paid the consultation fee in cash. She carried one thing into my office: a brown accordion folder, tied shut with a shoelace, and she set it on my desk gently, with both hands, the way you set down something that might go off. Then she looked up, and the fake name stopped mattering, because the woman on the other side of my desk was my mother, 11 years. I worked in that woman's diner, 5 a.m. openings. 16-hour Saturdays. Every holiday you can name. I spent on my feet with a coffee pot in my hand. In all that time, I never received one paycheck. Not one. Here is what I didn't know until the morning. I finally walked out. On paper, I did get paid $214,500. Reported to the federal government under my Social Security number. Money I never saw a dollar of, and here is what my mother didn't know. Sitting in my office with her folder and her borrowed name. Today, I read tax files for a living. I am an enrolled agent. That is a federal license to stand between ordinary people and the IRS. The Internal Revenue Service, the people who collect this country's taxes when the government says you owe them. I am the one who checks their math. The government had finally started asking my mother where 11 years of my wages went, and out of every tax professional in the state of Minnesota, she came to me, because in her mind, one rule still held. The rule she raised me on. Family doesn't invoice family. She was about to learn what that rule actually costs. My name is Marin Holt. I am 38 years old. And if you have ever been the one person in your family who was counted on for everything and counted as nothing, this story is going to sit somewhere very close to your ribs. If it does, the like button and the subscribe button are right there, and the comments are open, but only stay if you want the whole thing. Because I am not going to tell you this story the way my family tells it. I am going to tell you the way the paperwork tells it. And paperwork does not flinch. To understand the woman in my waiting room, you have to come back with me, all the way back. 11 years before the morning, I walked out of that diner for good. I was 16 years old, and it was the summer. My mother took my Saturdays. This is the only jump backward I am going to ask you to make. From here, we move forward, 1 year at a time, until we're standing in my office again, looking at that accordion folder. Stay with me. Every detail I hand you is going to matter. The diner was called the Copper Kettle, and it sat on the main road of a small town in northern Minnesota. The kind of town where the lake decides the economy, and the church decides the gossip. My grandfather built the kettle with his own hands in the 60s. He poured the counter himself. He drove the order spike into the wood beside the register. A plain metal spindle, sharp as a nail, standing straight up. When a ticket was paid, it went on the spike. That was the whole system. My grandfather used to lift me onto the counter when I was small, hand me a finished ticket, and let me stab it down. He'd say, "A ticket on the spike means somebody paid. Everything in this building is either owed or settled, and the spike knows which is which. I want you to remember that spike. It is going to come back, and when it does, it is going to mean something different." My father died when I was 9. My grandfather died when I was 14, and the kettle passed to my mother, Colleen. Within a year, she had married Dale, a man who sold pontoon boats badly and gave financial advice worse. And by the summer I turned 16, The kettle had become the family's entire livelihood, and I had become part of the equipment. It didn't happen with an announcement. It happened the way these things always happen. One Saturday at a time. First it was, "We're short-handed this weekend, honey." Then it was, "You'll open with me this summer." By September of that year, I was working the counter before school, closing on weekends, and running the whole floor alone every Sunday. Somewhere in there, I asked the question every teenager with a job eventually asks. I asked what I'd be getting paid. My mother didn't get angry. That is the thing I need you to understand about her. Because it is the thing that took me 2 decades to understand. She never once raised her voice at me. She lowered hers. She took my hand across the prep table, looked at me with something that photographed exactly like love, and said the sentence that would run my life for the next 11 years. "Marin, family doesn't invoice family. You live here," she said. "You eat here. Everything you have came out of this register, and someday, all of it comes back to you. This diner is your inheritance. Sweetheart, you are not working for me. You are working for you." I was 16. I was Ispin. It sounded like math. It sounded like love with a ledger behind it. I didn't know. The ledger was real. I didn't know it had my name on it. And I definitely didn't know that the same month she gave me that speech, an envelope from a bank arrived at the diner, addressed to me. And my mother slid it off the mail pile into her apron pocket and told me it was junk. "Hold on to that envelope. We'll open it together. About 20 years from now, 9 years before the morning I walked out, I turned 18, and on my 18th birthday, my family gave me 2 gifts. The first was a sheet cake from our own walk-in cooler, with my name spelled wrong in gel icing. The second was a stack of papers. Dale brought them out after the plates were cleared, in a manila folder, with a pen already clipped to the front. He'd combed his hair for it. He explained, in his pontoon salesman voice, that now that I was 18, I could finally be on the diner's insurance paperwork, like a real adult. Liability, he said, protection, if a customer ever slipped on our ice. This is what kept the family safe. There was a woman with him I'd never met, a notary. That is a person the state licenses to watch you sign things, and to stamp the page as proof it was really you, really there. She had a little embossing seal that crimped the paper like a cookie press. Dale kept calling her sweetheart. She kept checking her watch. I signed where the little flags told me to sign 4 signatures. I was 18 years old, and one day, and I trusted the people feeding me cake. Here is what I actually signed. Though I wouldn't learn it for years. It was a personal guarantee on a business line of credit. An $85,000 borrowing limit for the copper kettle from First Ridgeline Bank. A personal guarantee means exactly what it sounds like. If the diner ever couldn't pay that debt, the bank was allowed to come after me. My car, my wages, my future. I had co-signed my family's borrowing. With a mouth full of birthday cake. In my head, I still call that stack the birthday papers. Remember the name. There are 3 documents in this story, and that is the first one. The mini lesson I want you to take from that scene is not that I was stupid. If you have ever signed something because a person you loved stood over you, smiling, you know exactly how that kitchen felt. The lesson is about how my mother's system worked. Nothing was ever taken from me. Everything was handed to me. Upside down with a pen. 6 years before the morning, I walked out. I tried to leave the first time. I was 21. I had been running the kettle's floor for 5 years, unpaid, and I had done something in secret that felt, at the time, like a bank heist. I had applied to the nursing program at the community college, 2 towns over. I got in. I still remember the acceptance letter. Real paper, embossed seal, my name spelled right. I told my mother on a Tuesday, after close, while she counted the drawer, and again, no yelling. She counted to the end of the 20s. Before she even looked up, then she took me through it gently. Like a doctor delivering a scan result, tuition costs money. Marin, where is that coming from? Piper's braces cost money. Your grandfather didn't build this place, so it could be sold to strangers, and who exactly covers your Sundays? Piper is my half-sister. She was 10 then, and I want to be clear with you, because it matters later. None of this is her fault. She was a kid who got braces. That is all she did. But my mother had a gift, and the gift was this. She could take everything she had decided and hand it back to you as something you owed. By the end of that conversation, going to nursing school didn't feel like a plan. It felt like a theft. Like I'd be robbing a dead man and a 5th grader on my way out of town. I deferred the enrollment, deferred it again the next year. There is no third deferral. The letter with the embossed seal went into a shoebox, and the shoebox went to the back of my closet. And I went back to the counter. One person watched all of this happen. His name was Otto, and he had cooked Saturdays at the kettle since my grandfather ran it. A big, slow-moving man who spoke maybe 40 words a shift and could hear a wrong order through a closed door. The week I gave up my seat in the nursing program, Otto didn't give me a speech. He slid a fold of bills across the prep table. $260. His own tips, saved back in a coffee can. Because he'd figured out years before I did that, nobody was paying me anything. I tried to push it back. He put one big hand flat on top of mine, the money underneath, and shook his head once. That was the whole conversation. Remember Otto. He gets one more scene and one line, and I have carried that line for 17 years. 2 years before the morning I walked out. The kettle had its best season ever, and I finally asked the dangerous question. That summer, Dale had talked my mother into extending hours for the lake tourists, which meant that I, 25 now, effectively the general manager, still officially nothing, was working open to close 6 days a week. That same summer, a brand new pontoon boat appeared in my mother's driveway, 22 feet of it. Dale named it after her. So one night in August, after close, I asked, not for the moon. I asked to be put on the payroll. Officially, like the dishwasher was, like the 17-year-old summer girl was. And my mother did something she had never done before. She opened the books to me, Saturday me down in the back office with the ledgers and the bank statements and walked me through, line by line, how the diner barely broke even. Look, she kept saying, tapping the columns. Look, there is nothing here. Marin, you think I am hiding money. Look, I looked. And you know what? It was almost convincing. Right up until I was putting the folders back on the shelf, and one page slid loose from a file that wasn't meant for me. It was a tax form. A Form 1099. I'll explain exactly what that is when it matters. And believe me, it is going to matter. And in the box where a business names the person it paid, I read my own name, Maren James Holt, my social security number, and a dollar amount with a comma in it. I stood there holding it for maybe 4 seconds before my mother took it out of my hand. Not snatched, took, smooth as a dealer clearing cards, and said, "That is a filing thing, honey, for the accountant. It is how family businesses do it. A filing thing. For the accountant." I was 25, exhausted, and trained since 16 to swallow whatever she handed me, so I swallowed it. But I want you to keep that page in your mind. The way it stayed, lodged in mine. My name. Her diner. A number with a comma. That was the second document. The birthday papers were the first, and the third one was already sitting in a post office sorting bin with my name on it, about to change everything. Stay with me. This next morning is the one the whole story turns on. The morning I walked out was a Tuesday in April. I can give it to you almost minute by minute, because I have replayed it that way for 11 years. 6:10 in the morning, I unlocked the back door of the kettle with the key I'd carried since I was 16. A brass key on a rabbit, his foot keychain. My grandfather had won at the county fair before I was born. That key opened the diner. Every single morning of my adult life. Remember it. It is the last thing I'll touch on my way out. 6:20. Coffee on. Flat top warming. Chairs down off the tables. 6:40. At Joanthome. The mail carrier came early on Tuesdays, and she handed the bundle to me directly, because my mother wasn't in yet. On top of the bundle was a certified letter. Certified means someone has to sign for it. It is how the sender proves the letter reached you, and this one wasn't addressed to the copper kettle. It was addressed to me. Maren James Dawes Holt. Because for my entire adult life, the diner had been my mailing address, and for my entire adult life, someone else had gotten to the mail first. Not that morning. The envelope was from the Internal Revenue Service. I opened it standing at the counter, next to my grandfather's Spike. And I read it 3 times, because the first 2 times my brain refused delivery. The letter said I owed the federal government $31,400. It said I had failed to file tax returns for 3 years running. It said that businesses had reported paying me income in those years. Income I had never reported, because as far as I knew, income was a thing that happened to other people, and since I had never filed, the government had done my returns for me. There is a name for that. It is called a substitute for return. The IRS's version of your taxes, built from whatever got reported under your number, with none of the credits or mercy you'd claim for yourself. It is always the worst possible version of your year. I had 3 of them. $31,400. I was 27 years old. I did not have $400. I want to describe to you exactly what I did next, because it is the part of me I am still proudest of. I did not cry at that counter. I did not scream. I folded the letter back into thirds, put it in my apron pocket, poured myself a cup of the coffee I had just made, and waited 40 minutes for my mother's car to pull in, watching the steam come off the cup like it had all the time in the world. 7:25. My mother came through the back, Dale behind her, carrying nothing as usual. I laid the letter flat on the prep table, smoothed it once with my palm, and asked one question. 4 words. What did you file? And I watched my mother read a federal letter accusing her daughter of hiding income, and I watched her face do something I will never forget. It didn't fall. It organized. Like a desk being tidied. She set the letter down and she said, calmly, warmly, in the voice she used on health inspectors, Marin, this is not a big deal. This is how family businesses do it. The accountant handles the paperwork side. You don't owe anybody anything. Throw it away and help me with the chairs. Throw it away. A certified letter from the federal government saying I owed more money than I had ever held in my life, filed against my name for income I never touched. Throw it away and help me with the chairs. Dale chimed in from the doorway with his contribution to my life, which was, sign nothing. Say nothing. Family handles family. Then he took a Danish from the case without paying for it, which, looking back, is the most honest summary of that man I can offer you. And my mother took my hand across the prep table. The exact same gesture as when I was 16. And said it again, the sentence, Ausschapenais, the whole religion, in 5 words. Family doesn't invoice. Family. Here is the thing about that morning. I didn't have proof of anything yet. I didn't know about the birthday papers. Not really. I didn't know what that 1099 had meant. I couldn't have told you a single section of the tax code. All I knew, standing at that prep table, was one thing. And I knew it in my spine before I knew it in my head. The federal government does not send certified letters over a filing thing. So I did the only thing left. I untied my apron and folded it on the counter. I took my grandfather's rabbit as foot off my keyring, worked the brass key loose, and set the key down next to the register. Right at the base of the spike, where every settled debt in that building had been stabbed for 60 years. My mother said my name once. Not sorry. Not wait. Just Marin. The way you'd say it to a dog heading for an open gate. I walked out the back door of the Copper Kettle at 7:40 in the morning with a federal letter in my pocket. $63 in my checking account, and no idea that I had just made the best decision of my life. If you have ever walked out of somewhere with nothing, purely because staying meant agreeing to a lie, put the word unpaid in the comments. Just that one word. I read every one of them. And I promise you there are more of us than you think. I drove to the only address I trusted. Otto's place, a greenhouse behind the lumber yard, where he was drinking coffee on the steps. Like he'd been expecting me. For years, I handed him the letter. He read it slower than any human has ever read anything. While I sat on his steps watching the town wake up and go to work, at all the places that paid their people. And when Otto finished reading, he didn't hug me, and he didn't rage. He tapped the letter with one thick finger and said the only thing he ever needed to say to me, the line I have carried for 17 years now. Through night classes and license, exams, and 1,000 other people's audits. Girl, your whole life. You've been a paid ticket on somebody else's spike. Time you found out who has been ringing you up. That night, alone in my car outside his house, with the letter on the passenger seat, I cried. Once. I howled. Once. Hard, ugly, steering. Wheel crying, the kind that leaves your ribs sore. It is the only time in this entire story that I cry. So if you are waiting for me to break down in front of my mother, you can stop waiting now. That was never going to happen. She didn't get my tears at 16, and she wasn't getting them at 38. What she was going to get was so much worse. She was going to get my competence. Now, the rebuild. I am not going to walk you through 11 years of it day by day, because you already know I survive. You met me in my own office at the top of the story, so let me give you the years the way they actually felt. Fast, cold, and forward. 6 weeks after I left, I was waitressing in Duluth, a real job, with a real pay stub. And I am not ashamed to tell you. I took my first one into the walk, in cooler, and read it like a love letter. Taxes withheld. My name spelled right. Next to money that was actually mine. If you've never had that taken from you, you cannot imagine what a pay stub can do to a person. 2 months after I left, a coworker pointed me to a free tax clinic that ran out of a church basement. On Saturdays, the volunteer who took my case was a retired IRS revenue officer. 30 years of chasing money for the government. Now spending her retirement helping broke people fight it. She spread my certified letter and my paperwork across a folding table, read for a long time, and then looked at me over her glasses and asked a question that cracked my life open. Maureen, who is Copper Kettle Incorporated? And why have they been telling the government they pay you $19,500 a year? There it was. The filing thing. Here is what my mother's accountant had been doing. Every single year, from the year I turned 16, the diner filed a form, 1099, on me. A 1099 is the form a business sends the government when it pays an outside contractor. Not an employee, a contractor, a separate little business of one. On paper, I wasn't the unpaid daughter. On paper, I was an independent businesswoman named Marin Jane Holt, who built the Copper Kettle. $19,500 a year for her services. $19,500 a year for 11 straight tax years. $214,500 paid to my name. I want you to feel that number. Not calculate it. In my county, in those years, that was a paid-off house. That was the nursing degree. 4 times over. That was every single deferral letter in my shoebox, funded with money to spare. Money the government believed I had been holding the entire time, and it gets one turn darker. So stay with me. Why would a business invent wages it never paid? Because invented wages are a deduction. Every fake dollar the kettle claimed it paid me was a dollar of profit it didn't pay taxes on. My unpaid years weren't just neglect. They were an instrument. I wasn't working for free. I was working at a profit. Someone else's. The retired revenue officer laid it out flat. No drama, which somehow made it worse. Then she said, "So where did the money actually go?" Because when a business files a 1099, there is usually a payment trail to match. And that question is what led us to the second discovery. The bank envelope. The one my mother slid into her apron when I was 16. And called junk. It hadn't been junk. It had been a statement for an account at First Ridgeline Bank, opened in my name the month I turned 15, with my mother as the adult on the account. An account I never knew existed. And into that account, month after month, year after year, went my wages. Real deposits. Matching the fake filings. Keeping the paper story straight. And out of that account, this part I wouldn't see in full until much later. So hold on. Went everything else. I call it the ghost account. That is the second document. The birthday papers. The ghost account. One more to go. Here is what the clinic did for me. And I need you to notice what it is not. It is not revenge. It is a person correcting her own record, which is every taxpayer's legal. We filed the real returns for my missing years. Income, 0. Because my income was 0. We filed the federal paperwork that formally disputes information filed under your number without your knowledge. I am simplifying the form names so you don't need a law degree for this story. But every step was standard, signed, and true. We stated, in writing, under penalty of perjury, that Copper Kettle Incorporated reported paying me money I never received into an account I never controlled. That is all I did. I told the truth. On the correct forms, slowly, in triplicate, to the one institution on earth, with infinite patience, and a longer memory. Then my mother, my $31,000 debt began to dissolve, year by year, as the corrected returns went through, and somewhere in a federal building, a file was opened that was no longer about me at all. Because when you prove that a business's filings to the government are fiction, the government does not shrug and close the folder. It turns, very slowly, like a lighthouse, toward the business. I didn't send them after my mother. Her own paperwork did. 11 years of it, signed, filed, and notarized. Every page a confession with a date stamp. All I ever did was decline to keep being the alibi. While that lighthouse turned, I built night classes in accounting while waitressing days, then a bookkeeping job, then the enrolled agent exams, 3 of them, on federal tax law, the license that lets you represent taxpayers in front of the IRS without being an attorney. I passed all 3 inside a year. And I'll tell you exactly why I was so good at it. Every practice problem about phantom income, every case study about falsified filings. I had lived it. Other students memorized the rules. I had been the loophole. Those years were not romantic. And I won't dress them up for you. The studio above the laundromat shook every time the dryers hit their spin cycle. And I studied federal tax law at a card table with earplugs in. On textbooks bought used. With a highlighter, I rationed like it was medicine. But I want to tell you about a shift that happened somewhere in year 3. Because if you are in your own rebuild right now, this is the part that is for you. There was a morning, an ordinary one, scraping ice off my windshield before a double. When I realized I had stopped rehearsing arguments with my mother. In my head, the imaginary courtroom, where I'd been trying my case every night. Since I left, had simply gone quiet, not because I forgave her, because I was busy. Turns out, the opposite of an open wound isn't closure. It is a full calendar that belongs to you. My first client as a licensed agent was a drywaller, whose ex-partner had run up payroll debts in their shared company name. Sound familiar? I took his case apart in 6 weeks, and when the abatement letter came, that is the government's way of saying, in writing, you were right. The debt is erased. He stood in my 2-room office and cried the way I had cried in my car outside Otto's house. And I understood, watching him, exactly what I had built and why. Some people become locksmiths because they were once locked out. That is the whole story of my career. 8 years after the morning, I walked out. I opened my own practice in Duluth. Small office, 2 rooms. My name on the door, spelled right, and on the wall behind my desk, mounted on a little wooden base. I keep a plain metal order spike. Otto brought it to me the day I opened, wrapped in a dish towel, the original, from the kettle's counter. My grandfather's own. He'd unscrewed it the week he finally retired and told no one. A ticket on the spike means somebody paid, he said, and put it in my hands. First thing every client of mine sees. Most of them think it is decoration. And that brings us back, all the way forward, 11 years forward, to a Tuesday last spring, and the 11 o'clock client with the fake name and the accordion folder. My mother sitting across my desk, in the office her free labor never built, about to ask me for the one thing I had never once been given. Help. Let me set the scene properly, because I had 11 years to imagine this room, and reality still managed to surprise me. She looked smaller. That is the first thing. Not older, smaller. The way people get when the story they've been telling stops working. The accordion folder on my desk was tied with a shoelace because the clasp had broken, and my mother is not a woman who keeps broken things. Which told me the folder had been handled a great deal. Recently, by frightened hands. She started the way she always starts. Warm. Marin, look at you. This office, your grandfather would be so proud. I said nothing. 11 years in this business has taught me that silence is the most underpriced tool in any room. So she untied the shoelace herself, and out came the story, and here is the shape of it. The copper kettle was under federal examination, an audit, the full kind, the kind with a human being assigned to it. Their longtime accountant, the filing thing accountant, had stopped returning calls the moment the first notice arrived, which is what guilty accountants do. Dale's advice, naturally, was sign nothing, say nothing. Which, in front of the IRS, is not a strategy. It is an accelerant. And so my mother had driven 3 hours south, booked under a fake name, so I couldn't refuse the appointment sight unseen, and put her whole life on my desk. Because I was family, and family doesn't invoice family. She had come to collect on the religion. I want to walk you through what happened next very carefully, because this is the part where every version of this story you've ever heard goes wrong. This is where the daughter is supposed to either melt or explode. Scream the speech she has been writing for 11 years. I did neither. What I did was open the folder and read. I read for 40 minutes while she sat there. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it because I am a professional, and before I said one word, I wanted to know exactly what the government already had. Reader, they had everything. Let me show you the 3 documents. The way I turned them around on my desk and showed them to her. One at a time, slowly. 1 page, raising the stakes at a time. Document 1. The examination notice itself, with its list of issues. At the top of the list, 11 years of contractor payments to a single recipient. Marin James Dame Holt, totaling $214,500. All of it formally disputed by that recipient years ago. In sworn filings, the kettle had never once answered. Every fake dollar had been deducted against the diner's profits. The government wanted the tax back on all of it, with interest. Eudornai. And because inventing an employee for 11 years is not a mistake, it is a design, they were proposing the civil fraud penalty. An extra 75%, stacked on top of the tax owed. I watched my mother hear the phrase civil fraud in a federal document with her name on it, and I watched her face try to organize itself. Like that morning at the prep table. It couldn't. There was too much on the desk. Document 2, deep in her own folder, because the examiner had requested bank records. And she'd brought them. The ghost account. 11 years of statements. From First Ridgeline, my wages going in. Month after month, tidy as a heartbeat, and going out. And I read these line items to her out loud, flat. The way you read a grocery list. A marine dealership. $22,000. A pontoon boat with her name on it. An orthodontist. A snowmobile. Dale's truck. The down payment, and 41 monthly payments. Cabo, 1 week. The year I was sleeping in a studio apartment above a laundromat and eating expired yogurt from the restaurant I served in. My unpaid years. Itemized. There is a special kind of quiet that lands on a room when a person is confronted with their own bank statements. Read aloud in their daughter's voice, I recommend it over screaming. Screaming ends. Line items just keep coming. And document 3. The birthday papers. Because here is what my mother didn't know that I already did. 2 years earlier, when the Kettles line of credit went into default, First Ridgeline had come after me. The personal guarantee. Remember, the one I signed at 18, believing it was slip and fall insurance. $85,000. And they wanted it from Marin J. Holt. Except the bank made one mistake. The guarantee they were enforcing wasn't my birthday signature. Personal guarantees like that one expire and get renewed. And the renewal on file was dated 6 years after the morning I walked out. Signed, supposedly, by me in a town I no longer lived in. Witnessed by a notary stamp. And when I pulled the notary's record, public information, anyone can check it. Her license to notarize had lapsed 2 years before that stamp. Hit the page, a dead seal, on a signature I never gave. On a debt I never touched. I didn't have to argue. I sent the bank the notary registry printout and a 2-page letter. And their own fraud department did the rest, the bank's written finding. And I keep a copy of this letter the way some people keep love letters. Released me completely, voided the forged renewal, and reassigned every dollar of that debt to the 2 people who had actually signed everything for 20 years. Colleen Holt. And Dale, whose handwriting, it turns out, slants exactly like mine when he is trying. So when my mother slid that folder across my desk, hoping I could make it all disappear, she was handing her file to the one person in Minnesota who had already, lawfully, politely, in writing, taken it apart once before. Then, I said my piece. And because I'd had 11 years to write it came out in exactly 3 sentences. Numbered. The way I deliver findings to any client. 1. I cannot represent you. The federal rules that govern my license forbid me from taking a case where I am the disputed party in the file. And unlike your accountant, I follow my rules even when no one is looking, especially then. 2. Nobody did this to you. I never reported you. I corrected my record once, years ago, because it was mine to correct. Everything since has been your own paperwork, testifying against you at its own pace. 3. There is one door left, and it isn't me. Hire a real representative. Amend everything. Tell the truth first and fast, and pay what you owe. The government forgives faster than daughters do. Then I stood, opened my office door, and said the last thing I had for her. She had raised me on 5 words, so I gave her 5 back. Family doesn't invoice family. You taught me that. And you were right. So understand. This isn't an invoice, Mom. It is a finding. Invoices can be negotiated. She stood in my doorway. A long moment. And then my mother, who had organized her face at every prep table and inspection and funeral of my life, said the only fully honest thing I ever heard her say. She said, "You counted all of it, didn't you?" And I said, "No, Grandpa's Spike counted it. I just read the tickets." Now, I know what some of you are feeling right now, because I felt it too, for years. You want the explosion. You want her on her knees in the parking lot. I understand. But I promised you the truth over the movie version. So let me show you what actually happens after a morning like that. Because I think the real version is colder, and I think cold is better. For the first 2 weeks, nothing. Then the phone calls started. Voicemails. At first, warm. "Marin, honey, I think we got off on the wrong foot." Then, businesslike. "Marin, we need those bank records back. They're the diner's property. They were copies." I'd returned the originals to her hand personally. Then, around week 4, the mask work stopped altogether, and the voicemails became a woman, narrating her own collapse. "You did this. After everything we gave you. You always were counting. You cold little." And there the recording cuts off. Every time. Because even in freefall, my mother knew what a recording was. I never answered one of them. Not out of cruelty, out of accuracy. There was nothing left in my file for her. Dale went a different way, because Dale always did. Around week 6, a letter arrived at my office from a lawyer 2 towns over. The kind of lawyer whose letterhead lists a fax number first. It threatened to sue me for defamation, interference, and, in a sentence I have framed in my head forever, the malicious destruction of a family business through misuse of confidential tax knowledge. I wrote back one line on my own letterhead, and I want to give it to you exactly. Every document referenced in your letter was filed by your clients. I look forward to discovery. Discovery is the phase of a lawsuit where both sides must hand over their records. All of them. Under oath. In other words, the one process on earth Dale could not survive. I never heard from the lawyer again. I am told he never got paid either. Which feels right. Nobody who worked for that family ever did. And while all of that noise was happening on my phone, the quiet machine kept turning. Here is where it ended up delivered to you flat. The way it deserves. The examination closed the following winter. The kettle's fake wages were disallowed. All of years of them. With the back tax, the interest, and the civil fraud penalty stacked on top. The final bill to Copper Kettle, Incorporated, came to just over $260,000. I'll translate that number the way I translated mine. It was everything. It was the diner. They tried to sell it as a going business and found no buyer. Because the town had heard by then. Small towns always hear. And nobody wanted to inherit that till. It sold at last for the value of the building and the lot. The pontoon boat went first. Though, I want the record to show the boat went first. And the bank debt, the $85,000 from the birthday papers, stayed exactly where the bank's fraud finding had put it, on the 2 real signatures. There was one final consequence tucked inside that finding. And it is my favorite, because I didn't cause it, and couldn't have. A forged signature under a dead notary seal isn't just a bank problem. The bank is required to report it. The county looked at the renewal, looked at the handwriting, and looked at Dale. He was charged the following spring. He took a plea, no prison, but a felony record, restitution, and a court order that he is never again to act as an officer of any business in the state. The man who told me to sign nothing and say nothing is now legally required, for the rest of his life, to disclose that document every time he signs anything at all. I didn't attend the hearing. I got the details the way I got everything in the second half of this story. From Piper. I need to finish her thread, because I promised you none of this was her fault. And I meant it. Piper was 29 by the time the kettle sold, a school speech therapist, raising a 4-year-old 2 hours from our hometown. She had grown up inside the same religion I had. She just grew up on the funded side of it, the Braces side. And you cannot blame a child for the ledger she was born onto. She called me the night the examination notice first arrived at the diner, before my mother ever booked the fake appointment. It was the first time we'd spoken in 6 years, and she opened with the only 3 words that could have worked. She said, "I believe you." Then she told me something I hadn't known, and it rearranged a piece of my chest. She'd found the ghost account statements years earlier, in college, snooping for her birth certificate. She was 19. She saw my name, and the deposits, and the withdrawal for her own braces. And she asked our mother about it. One time. And she got the same warm hand across the same table, and the same 5 words. And she did what 19-year-olds in that family did. She swallowed it, and it sat in her for a decade. The way the 1099 sat in me. You want to know what those 5 words really cost my mother? Not the diner. This. Both of her daughters, decades apart, holding a piece of the truth alone in the dark, each of us swallowing it. For her, that was the system's real product, not money. Silence, manufactured daily, in bulk. Piper and I don't talk about the kettle much now. We talk about her kid, who calls me Aunt Mare and believes I am personally in charge of all money in America. Which, fair enough. Last summer they drove down and stayed a week, and her daughter stood on a chair in my office and asked what the metal spike was for. And Piper looked at me over her head with an expression I recognized from Otto's front steps. So I lifted her up, the way my grandfather lifted me, and handed her a paid receipt, and let her stab it down. A ticket on the spike means somebody paid. I told her, everything is either owed or settled. Sweet pea, that thing knows which is which. As for my mother, no. There was no reunion, and I am not going to fake one for you. She rents a small place near the lake now. She works, for a wage, for the first time in her adult life, front of house at a supper club, where I am told she is charming and punctual, and excellent with difficult customers, all of which I believe completely. Piper sees her at Christmas. She has, once, in writing, come close to the word, sorry. She wrote, I did the books the way I was taught. But I know now the books weren't the whole truth. It isn't an apology, but it is the first sentence she ever wrote me that an auditor couldn't tear apart. And from her, that is a kind of honesty. I never wrote back. Some tickets you don't spike. You just stop carrying them around. One last thing. And then I'll let you go. The week the kettle sold. An envelope came to my office with no return address. Inside was no letter. Just a brass key on a rabbit is foot keychain. The one I laid at the base of the spike the morning I walked out. The one that opened that building every morning of my young life. She had kept it 11 years. And at the end, with the diner gone and nothing left that it opened, she mailed it to the only person who ever really held it. for 11 years. That key had meant the same thing to me. It meant everything I unlocked. For people who never paid me. Every 5 a.m., every holiday. The whole unpaid ledger of my youth. Cast in brass. It hangs in my office now, on a little hook, directly above my grandfather's spike. A key to a door that no longer exists. Over the needle that finally counted everything. And when new clients ask about it, people sitting where my mother sat, terrified of their own paperwork, I tell them the truth. That is the last thing I ever got from the family business, I say. It took 22 years. But they finally paid me. One key opens everything. Because my mother was right. In the end, in a way she never intended. Family doesn't invoice. Family shouldn't have to. Love isn't supposed to keep books. But if you make your ledger out of a person, if you spend a daughter like a line of credit, then understand that somewhere on a counter, in an office, in a church basement full of folding tables, the tickets are piling up, and one morning, somebody settles them all at once. Everything is either owed or settled. Make sure you know which one you are. My name is Maren Holt. I read the fine print for a living. And I got that job the hard way. If this story stayed with you, the like button and the subscribe button take 2 seconds. And they genuinely decide whether stories like this get told. If you've ever been the unpaid one, the counted on, the ghost on somebody's payroll, you already typed unpaid in the comments. And I am reading everyone. Tell me what your spike would say. See you in the next one.